here in Mexico City, where the Olympics closed 2 weeks ago, with most of the gold medals taken by other nations. It's a pleasure to be here to see an international sport where Britain holds the dominating position. And already the lap record established by Jim Clark when he won the race last year is in real danger, because his time has been beaten by no fewer than 12 drivers in practice. We gather here at the end of a very eventful season, a particularly sad one, of course, because so many top drivers have gone, and above all Jim Clark, who before he died established himself as the greatest Grand Prix driver of all time with a record of 25 victories. It's been an eventful season in other ways too. There's been the great controversy about advertising on the cars. The cars themselves, of course, have changed too. They're very spectacular. But is it that brings people, spectators from all over the world, to see the cars, or is it the drivers? Certainly the drivers who've got plenty of glamour and plenty of guts. Among them is Jackie Ickx of Belgium, who's driving here today only 42 days after his leg was badly broken in a serious crash when his Ferrari's throttle stuck open. And of course Jackie Stewart has been driving for a large part of the season with a cracked wrist in plaster. Anyway, while the mechanics are putting the final touches to the cars, let's move around and talk to a few people.
Sunday, November the 3rd, on the programme, the men and the cars lined up to take part in the Mexican Grand Prix, the last of this year's championship races. 130,000 people converge on the autodrome in the suburbs of Mexico City. Chris Amon driving for Ferrari with Jackie Ickx back in the race only 6 weeks after his crash in Canada. Pedro Rodriguez carrying Mexican hopes with him in the V12 BRM. Lucien Bianchi at the back of the grid after slow practice times in his Cooper BRM. And the now familiar colours of the Honda team, entering 2 cars driven by Joe Bonnier and John Surtees, who will be taking place number 6 at the start. Car number 1, reigning world champion Denny Hulme's McLaren Ford, one of 3 in the race, providing a strong challenge from New Zealand, with Bruce McLaren backing him up in car number 2. 6 points down on the championship table, Denny Hulme talked to Barry Gill.
I wasn't around when the old drivers were really going, and the big cars where you could see the arms and the elbows, but some people say it's not as exciting now as it was. Would you agree?
Well, from a driver's point of view, I think it's just as exciting. We had to advance with the times, and I wouldn't like to fly the Atlantic in a Tiger Moth, and this is the same deal, you know. You can see the people in a Tiger Moth, but I'd say it's just as exciting. You know, the tyres have got bigger, the cars have got smaller, and the engines have got more compact, but just as much power, if not more. No, from my point of view, I'd sooner have it like it is now.
Before you became a driver, you used to go and watch motor racing, and now you're letting people watch you. What do you think it is that attracts people to the sport?
I think it's the speed. Some people come along to see the accidents that might occur. You know, there's got to be a certain percentage of the crowd there for that. It's the excitement and the personalities. I'm sure a lot of it, you know, we've lost a lot of personalities in the motorsport in the last couple of years. But there's still a few people here, and I think they're doing as best they can. I'm sure they come and see people like Graham Hill and Jackie Stewart.
Top drivers reaching for higher lap speeds on tyres over a foot wide, forced down on the track by the aerofoils, weird wings that have changed the face of Formula One racing since the Belgian Grand Prix last June. But the 1968 season has been marked by the success of the Ford Cosworth engines, which power nearly half the cars on the grid. Among them, Matra number 15, driven by Jackie Stewart.
Well, I think it's a very exciting sport. It offers more, perhaps, than any other sport that I know of from the excitement point of view. I think we must accept that it's a little bit more exciting than a football match, because I suppose of the danger attached to it and the risks that perhaps the drivers are taking. And I think this element of danger and risk must influence the appeal to the spectator.
Do you think that people genuinely come to see an accident sometimes?
I think that people do come to see motor racing to see incidents. I don't think anyone wants to go and see a driver being dreadfully injured or losing his life, but I think that there are times when a spectator likes to see a spin or likes to see some sort of drama that I suppose that makes people realise that it is dangerous.
Jackie Stewart has only one man to beat to win the World Championship and take the lead from Lotus and the Chapmans. Only 3 points ahead, Graham Hill will depend on Colin Chapman and the Lotus team to give him a car that will do better than just stay in the race. But Hill seemed confident when he talked to Barry Gill.
Do you think the spectators get this impression of the speed? They don't see the drivers like they used to?
I don't see it matters 2 hoots, frankly. It's a lot of old coswallop that the journalists seem to write up about. Everyone talks about it. The old days are always better. But I think they're looking backwards all the time, and I think you've got to look forwards. It's there, it's a modern sport, and it's certainly mushroomed throughout the world, and the attendance figures certainly show this, and the fact that I'm asked to go and drive everywhere, all over the place, and all the other top drivers means that there's the interest there, because the people are paying to come and see it. Otherwise they couldn't afford to get us down here to watch the race. I mean, the cars are here from England, that cost them a lot of money, so the support's there, so the interest is there.
How positive a contribution do the spectators make to the sport from your point of view? Not the money, but a footballer says he's aware of a good crowd. Does it mean a lot to you?
No, you don't know them. You don't know they're there. When you're really having a go and really concentrating 100%, you just don't know there's anybody there. You don't see them. You don't notice they're there. Of course, you can't hear them. I think that's the big thing. I think a footballer isn't all that conscious of seeing them there, but there probably is in that very close compound space and ambience. It's promoted by all these people, but I think he probably hears the noise. Well, we got quite a lot of noise here, and we got earplugs and helmets on, and we can't hear them. If they do make a noise, we can't hear them. So we're really quite on our own in a little world of our own. And the only contact we have with the outside world when the red flag drops is the pit signals.
2:15 and the start of the race is only 15 minutes away. In the pits, the tension mounts as works teams make final adjustments to the finely tuned machinery, and the idols of the crowd prepare like gladiators to go out into the hot Mexican sun. With the thermometer climbing towards the 90s and an altitude of nearly 7,500 feet to cut a car's performance by as much as 25%, this will be as much a test of the mechanics as it will be for the drivers to keep the cars on the road. Or is it the machines, or is it the men that have drawn the crowd? 125 British enthusiasts travelled out on a specially chartered aircraft, and all around the circuit the accents reflect the international flavour that's at the very heart of Grand Prix racing.
What's it about Grand Prix motor racing that brings you here?
Oh, I like the sport.
Why do you like it?
Well, many reasons. Exciting. There's a bit of international flavour about it. Scotsmen, there's Englishmen, there's Continentals.
The finest sport there is, motor racing.
What makes it so fine and spectacular?
Well, the English drivers, they're some of the finest drivers in the world. And I've actually come down to see Graham Hill win this one today.
You haven't come to see an accident?
Oh, yes. Oh, we enjoy accidents as well, but we like to see the boys drive well.
Why do you come to watch motor racing?
Because I like very much the motors, and the emotion is very great, and I love all the pilots here, especially Chris Amon is my favorite pilot.
You say you love all the drivers. Could you ever marry a driver?
Yes, maybe. Why not?
Grand Prix racing is just fantastic. It's out of this world.
In what way?
Well, preparation-wise, the fitters, the boys that do everything, the backroom boys, and not only the stars, the drivers, everything.
Which interests you most, the developments in the machinery or the personality of the drivers?
Quite frankly, I've asked myself the same question many times, but I think it's a mixture of both, really. Some of it is allied to road use, but not all of it, really. It can't be used, and I feel it's the characters connected with it, plus the machinery, the skills that's required for this type of racing. I think it's just out of this world.
What do you admire most, the skill or the power of the machines, or is it the speed or the noise, or what?
Well, I think it's all. You know, I love the noise, and I love to look at the cars. Beautiful.
Why do you find them beautiful?
Oh, they're just, you know, the shape, the color, the whole thing. I really enjoy it very much.
Which do you like most, the drivers or the cars?
No, that's not a fair question. I mean, no, I think I would have to say the cars, really. They're very exciting.
Well, this is very interesting. Do you have any favorites amongst the drivers?
No, not anymore. I just like the sport now, you know. I don't really have any favorites.
Could you ever see yourself marrying a Grand Prix driver?
No, I never would.
Why not?
Well, it's far too dangerous a sport.
65 laps round a circuit that's just over 3 miles long. 203 miles of straights and corners at an average speed of well over 100 miles an hour, touching 160 on the straight. A grueling test for cars and drivers. 2 hours of the toughest, most exacting driving in the world. On it hinges the 1968 World Championship with Hill, Stewart and Hulme, each with a chance. Seconds to go, and on the grid, the desperate final preparations. Graham Hill in the Lotus number 10 has the third position behind Joe Siffert and Chris Amon on the front row. On the warm-up lap, the offside front wheel felt out of balance, but now there's nothing that he or Colin Chapman can do.
What did you say, Brian?
It's been balanced, but they switched around. Have we got a balance wheel on or not?
Jackie Stewart, well back on the grid, has picked up a nail, and the tyre must be changed in seconds. One of the fastest Grand Prix cars in the world. In practice, one after another drivers had forced up the pace, shattering the lap record set up last year by Jim Clark, setting themselves a fantastic 3 miles in 1 3/4 minutes to beat. Right from the start, British drivers led the way. At the end of lap 1, it was Hill's Lotus number 10 in the lead, from Surtees number 5, Stewart number 15, Eamon number 6 and Hulme number 1. For Mexican fans, a poor start by Rodriguez was disappointing, but he was later to fight his way back in a remarkable recovery. Joe Sifford, starting in pole position, got away slowly, but soon used the record-breaking speed he had found in practice to bring himself up amongst the leaders. With Surtees' Honda also out, Jackie Ickx's Ferrari had ignition failure out on the circuit and he couldn't walk home on his injured leg. Disappointment too for Gurney. Few people love a loser. But failure can also be costly for the car constructor.
John Cooper, Grand Prix racing is getting more expensive all the time. What's the future for the small constructor like yourself?
Well, I think we're in a very, very serious position at the moment. I mean, only a year ago, half the fuel companies backed out of supporting motor racing. And now we hear this year that one of the main tyre supporters are out, Firestone. And I think we've got to look to people outside the motor industry for support, such as cigarette companies or liquor companies or something like that. And I must admit, at the beginning, the British television didn't help us, but I think they've seen the light now, and I think they will allow advertising on cars.
You feel that it can't go on unless we have advertising on the cars?
No, the money's got to come from somewhere, and I think it'll have to come outside the motor industry.
You've had your share of bad luck this season. Can you cover your costs?
Oh no, we'll have to finance it to quite a high extent this year, I'm afraid.
Are you going on next year?
Well, we hope to, but we must find a sponsor.
What's the main appeal of it to you to carry on this struggle?
I like motor racing.
I'm told that the top drivers won't even start talking now unless you can rustle about £40,000 for the annual retainer. What's the hope for people like you in those conditions?
Well, we just haven't got that sort of money now. It's not coming into the sport. And I think we've got to look to the new up-and-coming drivers and train them.
You've certainly done well giving a chance to Vic Elford.
I think, within 6 months he'd be very good.
Good enough at Mexico last weekend to be one of only 9 out of the 21 starters to finish the Grand Prix. Meanwhile, the battle between Hill and Stewart was still on. At the halfway mark, it was anybody's race, and the crowd were treated to a feast of fast driving. Bruce McLaren was still very much in the race, steadily moving up the field to pass Brabham on lap 38. With the Lotus lead firmly in the hands of Graham Hill, and with Jackie Stewart fighting fuel feed troubles, Jackie Oliver in Lotus number 11 was showing some of the skill that was to earn him 3rd place at the finish ahead of Pedro Rodriguez. The Swede, Joe Bonnier, in the unfamiliar cockpit of Honda number 17, was performing like an old hand, staying ahead of the man who was to take the fastest lap time of the race. Joe Sifford, in the Walker Lotus Ford, lost ground badly, dropping to the tail on lap 26 due to a sticking throttle. But he stayed in the race in fighting style to finish 6th. In pit number 1, Colin Chapman, his wife Hazel, and the Lotus team were anxiously on the lookout for signs of trouble.
You've had a good deal of trouble with cars braking this year. Breakages of drive shafts, breakages of suspension and so on. The things on the chassis braking. Aren't the cars really now too light to cope with the power and the speed?
No, most of the trouble we've had this year has arisen from needing to change our drive shafts, the universal joints and the drive shafts on the transmission, and we've had a great deal of difficulty getting adequate ones made in the time because it's a very complicated process. Apart from these drive shaft failures, I don't think we've had any more trouble with anyone else. We're happy now we've got the new design of shaft and we haven't had any trouble since.
You say no more trouble than anybody else, but it's a pretty familiar sight on Grand Prix circuits to see suspension breaking and wheels coming off and other dramatic things happening. Isn't there a case for making the minimum weight heavier so that the cars are more solid?
None whatsoever, because the suspension, however heavy a car is, the suspension has always got to be the lightest part of it, because this is what gives a car its road holding.
It's been a pretty expensive season in drivers, and it's hit Lotus particularly hard. Do you think that anything could be done quickly to make racing less dangerous?
There's always an element of risk in racing, and this is something that we all have to accept. We do our very best to make sure that this is minimised, but I'm afraid that in a sport as competitive as motor racing, there will always be drivers taking cars to the very limit, and of course there are accidents.
One of the most interesting technical developments this year has been the widespread use of aerofoils on the cars to help to increase the adhesion. Has this, in fact, delayed the development of four-wheel drive racing cars?
I think the two are entirely separated subjects. I don't see how you can say that you have aerofoils or you have four-wheel drive. I can't see what's wrong with having aerofoils and four-wheel drive if you wish to. But I do feel that we're now starting to pay a lot more attention to the aerodynamics of racing cars, not so much from the point of view of considering the minimum drag, as we're now trying to consider minimum lift or even negative lift in order to obtain better road adhesion. And I'm quite sure, absolutely certain in fact, that the work we're doing now on minimum lift will read off into production cars in the future, making production cars safer on the road.
Aerofoils, magnesium wheels and big tyres, a Grand Prix profile with a promise for the ordinary motorist. But on the Mexico circuit last Sunday, the motoring was anything but ordinary as the cars went into the last 10 laps in this order. Hill, McLaren, Brabham soon to drop out with lack of oil, Servo Gavin also to retire, then Stewart falling behind with fuel pump trouble. After him, Bonnier. And behind Bonnier, just a lap behind him, Oliver, who finished third. Hill wins the race and the championship with Colin Chapman's Lotus.
Is there anything else in life you'd like to do?
Yeah, I'd like to live to be 100.